Welcome to That Good Fight, a Reformation for Gentlemen. My name is Aaron Edwards, and I'm joined, listeners, by a very, very, very special guest.
I come
today.
to you now.
Nathan Taylor, like Gandalf returning, and or someone else who returns.
Really disappointing uncle at Christmas.
A disappointing uncle. Uncle Nathan.
Uncle Nathan's back. Hey, man. My eyes have gone madly.
Fresh from his 4-month sojourn in the French Riviera, was it, or in the northeast?
Oh, if only. I mean, we've got to be somewhat honest. I have been here already.
It's true.
We have tried.
Behind
the scenes, things have happened and things have failed.
That's it.
But this now, for your purposes, ladies and gentlemen, hello.
Hello.
I am back.
Hello. It's good.
I am
Would you say it's
returned.
good to be back, Gary Glitter style, but you don't really want the connotation?
I don't want the Gary Glitter. No, let's move swiftly away from that
swiftly
parallel.
away from Gary Glitter connotations, straight to hello. It's good to be back. Oasis had a song called Hello.
That's true.
Where they literally said that. It's good to be back. It's good to be back. So we'll go with Oasis for the
Oasis is
salt of the earth. English Britpop. Listeners, good to. Well, I say it's good to hear from you again. It's good to be with you again in some capacity. Sorry we haven't been around for a while, but we hope to be able to get some more episodes out soon. Thank you for those who are supporting us on Patreon, especially the faithful, patient patronites. And it's good to be here. I've been obviously away a little bit over January. Yeah. I said January like a...
January... European,
like a continental, like a true
January.
Genois, which I don't think is either language.
With my croissant.
Yeah, that's it. I've gone mix of German and French together there. Genois.
Kaiserschlacht.
Yes, indeed, the beautiful German language.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, yes.
It means the Emperor's War. I've just been teaching World War I, so I've got it in my head.
Well, that's
there you
good.
go, bit of a connection.
Yeah, and there is, I guess there's a connection in that when I was, one of the places I went
Very
to
tenuous,
was
no doubt.
Vienna.
Okay.
And
Austria-Hungary.
The bar in the hotel I stayed in was called the Franz Ferdinand Bar.
Oh, okay.
Which I don't think was a reference to the Scottish indie band.
The 2000s band.
It was the Archduke who was the principal catalyst.
Much
publicly.
less famous.
Yes. Who would the heir to the Austro-Hungarian imperial throne, who was of course murdered and sort of catalysed the First World War, as you know, as a good history teacher you are. Being in Vienna was fascinating for various. Have you ever been there?
I've never been there, but then I am a very untravelled man.
You are a distinctly untravelled man.
I'm very untravelled. I do not have a passport.
You are principally
I am
untravelled.
a hobbit. I am a hobbit. I'm waiting for my Gandalf to come and take me on an adventure.
Yeah.
It could be you, Aaron.
It could be me.
It could be you.
I mean, it sounds quite Gary Glittery, but I won't,
just move swiftly on from that again. No, I have never been to Vienna. I've been to Belgium. I've been to France. I've been to Paris. I've had some lovely memories of Paris before.
You've been to Paris?
Yes, before the onslaught and the diversification.
Yes.
I was there.
The Muslims.
Yeah, 2000. You just say it. 2004. It's 8:00 in the morning in Paris in the summer. The sunrise over the Eiffel Tower. It's just gorgeous, absolutely gorgeous. I was passing through on my way to Thésée, and it's just a wonderful. So I've been to a few places, but I am remarkably untravelled, and I think my passport. I think that voided. It must be about 15 years ago.
You'll get to the airport one day, and they'll be like, "What are you doing here?"
We've missed you.
We've missed you. Where have you been?
Yeah.
You're not. I don't know if you're allowed to go past the border anymore.
I don't think I would be.
Yeah.
But no, it doesn't stop me longing for these places. I think Vienna sounds lovely.
Yeah, it is lovely, and it is also troubling. So those who are readers of my Substack may have read my 2 pieces I did on it called Postcards from Vienna, where I'm reflecting a lot on everything that it brings up. Like I do enjoy reflecting when I travel, because you get what literary theorists would refer to as defamiliarization, because you're going somewhere, and of course you're going to have naive reflections and idealistic reflections like anyone would if they came into this room. They'd be, oh, how amazing, look at these amazing things that I haven't really got a compass for. Or they see the contrast with their own culture, that kind of thing. Going to Vienna was interesting because you're seeing something of a relationship between what's going wrong in our culture and what's going wrong in mainland Europe. the continent, as we like to say here. Even though we are technically in the continent of Europe, we like to say the continent appropriately, because Britain
we are different.
We are beyond a continent. We're kind of our own continent in our own heads, because we had an empire, which was pretty impressive. So Vienna, of course, had a very impressive empire as well. And when you go around Vienna, I think I might have said this to you when I last went through on a sort of stopover last year, just for like half a day. You notice just how mind-bogglingly impressive the civilization was, to an extent that it's even better. It far exceeds, I would say, the grandeur of the nice parts of London. I know some would say, "Oh, there aren't any nice parts of London." There are. London still is, and like there are parts of London that are nice. They're curated, of course, and they're not reflective of the reality of all of London. You could be taken on a tour of London and see the nice parts that might make you feel nice and patriotic.
Yeah, but it's high culture, isn't it?
It's high culture.
For a long time, Vienna and generally that area was known for its high culture, and it's partly what the First World War demolished.
Yeah, and you see it in a kind of ridiculous way. Like I think I was saying that to you when you walk past some of the buildings. So there's high culture that we would understand it, and then there's like Vienna. There's like Viennese high culture. You're walking past buildings by the end where it literally like isn't worth you turning your head to look at a building that in most towns that you'd go and visit would be the most impressive building that there is, because there's so many ostentatiously built buildings which were clearly so expensive but had a sort of sense of pride in their culture. I regularly think that we feel down on our luck as Brits by thinking we used to be significant and we're far less significant. Now we're not as insignificant as people would tell us we are, and there's much that we can mine and recover and regalvanise, absolutely, and we want to do that. But we do feel down on our luck when we look at the political situation today, we look at the state of the nation, etc., and we think, goodness, what a ridiculous contrast with 100 years ago, or even more so with the Viennese. Because, when was the last time you thought about Austria?
Today. But in all fairness, I was just teaching about it.
Okay.
No, but I know what you're saying. Like as a geopolitical force.
Who knows what they do? Who cares? And it's a really sad thing, because you think at one point everyone would have known what they did, everyone would have cared, and they knew about it, and then they sort of promoted that to the world. They were a culture that was extremely proud and influential within the most influential continent in the world. And
now
suddenly,
known for giving us very famous painters, for example, of the 20th century.
That is true.
It's probably more readily on the lips of people in England and USA.
Well, it is. Fascinatingly, that is, it is actually in Vienna that the Austrian painter had his awakening moment on anti-Semitism. Now, maybe we should do a whole episode on anti-Semitism, Judeo-Christian stuff another time. But it is fascinating that Vienna, in the turn of the century, as in the 19th to the 20th, so it's obviously at its absolute high point, Viennese coffee house culture and all the rest of it. So yeah, Hitler's there, and he is observing various Marxist problems. Now, of course, the debate is to go, do you allied Marxism and Judaism, etc.? That's where the kind of complications arise for many people. But he's looking at Marxism and seeing the problem of it. And I think it's important. I haven't read Rod Dreher's recent stuff, but he's getting very scared and worried about Christian nationalism, it seems, now, probably because of the Nick Fuentes stuff in the US. But I've seen him referring to Weimar America. And I do think it's important to think about the conditions under which Nazism flourished because of a contrast with the Marxism of the Weimar world. And of course, Weimar Germany, but you can see the same problems that Hitler's seeing in Vienna in the early 20th century, I think even before the First World War. I think that's when he was there. And then looking at the way in which that isn't going to sustain a culture. And so you then have, obviously, there's lots of people who would respond in such a way that they would willingly go for some stronger, powerful pro-nationalist cause with the compromise of, yes, this isn't ideal, this isn't, because at least it's better than the absolute slosh that we have that Marxism has sort of given us. And I didn't realise quite how much of a stronghold it was. Of course, Marx literally was there in Vienna, as was Trotsky and various others who sort of influenced the Russian Revolution ultimately. Freud was there in Vienna as well. And so you think of all these architects of Hitler, Freud, and Trotsky, and Stalin was in Vienna for a time as well. Like it was like a place where people went to talk about things and to sort of speak about those kind of high level cultural issues which are going to affect the foundations of everything. And of course they did. Like that massively changed the world that we have today. A lot of the trash that we have to deal with today, we're still picking up and trying to build better things, is because of what happened in the last 100 years. Based on the way that those people looked at their culture and thought, what's the problem and how do we diagnose the problem? How do we sort of solve it? And of course, the way they chose to do that has been pretty destructive. And so it was hard to ignore that when you're walking around these amazing buildings, that Vienna wasn't bombed during the war. So it's more intact than many of these other amazing, former brilliant cities. And maybe that's why it surpasses London in some sense, because it doesn't have the same level of destruction. But you just see this massive contrast. You see areas that are completely ravaged by graffiti, like including amazing stonework, which is elaborate and impressive, which shows you, well, okay, so how are you doing Vienna with raising the next generation? Well, we've given over the entire elaborate stonework canal to the graffiti youth, as it were. And we are, propagating absolutely depraved sexual immorality on their posters, way worse than we would have here. Like really explicit stuff and stuff, like loads of peep shows and things like that. You see, there's a lot of seediness as well. And then there's the lovely high culture Mozart-y type areas. Because of course Mozart was there. Everyone was there who was impressive culturally, basically over the last 200 or 300 years prior to the 20th century. So you just see this massive conflagration of everything that was amazing about European Christendom, and then it's like the center of the inferno. It feels like it's the center of the volcano of everything went wrong. Not just Franz Ferdinand, because of course First World War catalyzes ultimately the Second World War in many respects. And what happens in those interwar years, those reflections that I've just referred to, which are going to be so influential sociologically, even on the US, of course, Freud's influence when he goes to America and then completely changes the way that modern people think, even if they trash his theories now. Psychoanalysis massively influenced the modern mind, and in tandem with secularism, in tandem with the liberal order, which emerged as a rejection of Nazism or fascism in general after the Second World War. So it is a fascinating place to go to reflect on these things. So yeah,
it's interesting. I've never been. So,
yeah. But you've heard the Billy Joel song.
I've heard the Billy Joel song. We were having this debate.
Vienna waits for you.
Vienna waits for you. But also Ultravox was the first one that came to my mind, and these guys didn't know it. Vienna, you know that? No, you didn't.
I didn't.
Until I just played it to you.
You played it before, and I still didn't know. But I only thought
you still didn't know. You haven't heard that song.
I'm sorry.
That's outrageous.
I'm not as well traveled. I'm not as well traveled in 80s style.
Yeah.
Well, I don't even know what. No, I like 80s music, but I don't know that whole genre.
Well, if there are any other Vienna themed songs, listener, send them in.
Please send them in, and we will. We'll do all we can.
Yeah, we'll do all we can to create a top 10 Vienna themed songs.
That's bound to get new patrons, subscribers. They're going to be like, when is the top 10 of Vienna? When we get 10 Vienna themed songs, then we could do a discussion of the lyrics, etc. But the Billy Joel one was good. But you've never been to Vienna, but you can see the issues, can't you? That we're dealing with, that the fallout from this grand culture, high culture, and of course there's lots of Catholic Protestant stuff going on as well, of course, because Vienna was a sort of a seat of the Counter-Reformation. So there's a Baroque church there. Forget the name of it offhand, but it's like ridiculously impressive aesthetically inside, but to maybe an overwhelming degree, and it's not immediately Counter-Reformation, but I think it might have been early 18th century, but still it's in the slipstream of that mode of thinking, to say we need to show that Catholicism, kind of show the Protestants what they're missing when they take their more iconoclastic route. So it was kind of interesting thinking of that, because of course when we're talking about Christendom and trying to reclaim it and say what was good about it, it's different to do that as a Protestant than it is as a Roman Catholic. Many Roman Catholics, it's just more natural, of course high culture, because that's what we had. Like, of course, we need to reclaim it because you guys are the real problem. You should never have left. Mm-hmm. Really, Protestantism is what birthed all of these terrible things that I've just mentioned, including the not only psychoanalysis in terms of the introspection of the individual, which they would say Luther invented, which is not true, but you can see how it's accentuated. But so many other things, so many other tropes that come from moving away from Rome. They would say inevitably it leads to a sort of disintegration of culture.
Yeah, certainly that it was like a furnace, a crucible, wasn't it? The beginning of the 20th century. I mean, as you're saying, it had roots before that. As you said, Mozart was in Vienna. The high culture of when we talk about high culture, we're talking about high art, we're talking about high opera, we're talking about high painting, high sculpture, all these things, which I'm assuming I've not been, but from what I know, it's head knowledge rather than experience.
For the Vox?
Yeah, exactly.
For the two songs you know about Vienna.
It's that's how I built my entire perception of it.
That's right.
But no, I mean, it is that early 20th century, and those authors that compare, to the modern state of things to Weimar Germany are not completely wrong. The fall from high culture to absolute degeneracy happens actually relatively quickly in the history of man. When talking a handful of decades, we're not talking very much more than that. I suppose what we've seen now is analogous to that. But even here in the UK, we began to we were somewhat sheltered by it, but we began to feel, obviously Marx was also here. Freud was also here. And then in the wake of that, you get the likes of Virginia Woolf and others. That everything in the 20th century, those authors, that sort of Bloomsbury group of authors, has many of the famous existentialists, of course, were visited here also, or had their own equivalents here. So there were lots of stuff went wrong in that early, and then First World War comes in like a wrecking ball and creates a sort of uncertainty and lack of assurance about the old cultural touchstones, the old cultural convictions. What is the point of all this stuff if it produces a world that made the First World War possible? What is the point of all this stuff if it can't even guarantee us against savagery? That's ultimately, this is why I think the Roman Catholic, that classic, and we should be careful because they're not all Roman Catholics talk like this, but it's usually what you find on Twitter. It's usually the sort of trad mass sort of people. Sort of people have the Vatican flag in their bio and all that sort of stuff. The very simplistic narrative that you've just alluded to, which is that the stark individualism, the expressive individualism goes back to Luther, and it's the Reformation that sparked it all off. But there are so many other subtle factors, not least the expressive individualism that came way before that in Petrarch, in Augustine, in others. So you've got other reasons, but First World War comes in and destroys not only the old certainties, but certainty itself. And I think that is a large reason for explaining why we're in the absolute mess that we're in. It was if existentialism existed before the First World War, of course it did, but it took root as a result of the First World War, and so it took it was able to take hold in a way that it never had before.
Yeah, that's right.
Because of course, if the world isn't out there meaningful, certain, and ordered, then it is for one to determine one's own boundaries and the terms of one's existence.
And it's fascinating how that's, existentialism, sorry for listeners who are like, what does that even mean? Just go and Google it. You all have phones. But basically the philosophical movement that was sometimes linked back to Kierkegaard, not always responsibly, but he kind of inspires it a little bit. But it's really French in the 20th century. France has a lot to answer for in the 20th century. Just generally, France has a lot to answer for because that's downstream from the French Revolution, of course. So it's like some of the ways in which we inherit. Here's the problem of what Protestantism caused. Well, no, in a sense, Roman Catholicism, the errors of Roman Catholicism of the time caused the revolt or the reform required. But of course, further down the line, the French Revolution, that revolt against hierarchy and authority, which the Orthodox and Catholic tradcath critiques would say that's our fault as Protestants. But really, it's particularly the effects of the French Revolution are where you get everything terrible that happens over the next 2 centuries. So lots of those ideas which are fermenting, which you see flowering, or whatever we call it, volcanically erupting in the 20th century, they were already sort of in the embryonic form and sort of gestating, I guess, for 100 years previously. So it's interesting that recently I was gathering with a group of leaders in London to talk about the issue of what it means to be a Christian nation in Britain. Kind of interrogating the question of Christian nationalism for Britain, because it's going to look it ought to look very different to the American instantiation of that, because we have such a different history. Even though we've got a shared history, kinship, cousinship, as it were, it will look different, sound different, and it has different moorings. We would harken back to Alfred in a way that is different to the way that Americans would, the way we'd think about that example and the examples that came afterward, that kind of thing.
Well, it's interesting. They don't usually appeal back to monarchs for obvious reasons.
Yeah, exactly.
But also they are an overwhelmingly. I mean, they're a very Protestant nation in that there are people of the word, and their constitution, because they're constitutionally minded, they usually, if they're going to find antecedents in English history, they're not going to look at Alfred as a person. They're going to look at Magna Carta, or the Forest Charter.
Absolutely, yeah, exactly.
They're going to look at actual written documents, Bill of Rights. You know, even to this day, when you listen to the likes of Douglas Wilson and his defense of the American Revolution, which is interesting, I don't altogether agree, but it is interesting. And usually you do find it's less of an appeal to individuals, and that which when I'm saying that, by the way, I'm talking about that's what real English history is. It's the eccentricity of individuals. It's what Napoleon said. England is a nation of shopkeepers. It's the eccentricity of individuals that makes England. But usually then Americans are given to looking for the rule of word, the rule of letter.
That's true.
And that is a very Protestant instinct, and one with which I greatly sympathise. But it also, I think, can obscure things.
Well, it's interesting. Even this gathering that we had, there's immediately a discussion over when are we going to have a constitution and statement of faith, that kind of thing, which was is a Protestant inclination, and it's also a very English inclination. Roger Scruton talks about that in his England and Elegy book when he says there's nothing more normal for in England than a group of English men to get together and try to solve some problem in society with constitution membership, etc., and kind of committee led almost. But I think there's a way in which that instinct gets a bit muddled with sort of modern bureaucracy, when it becomes more like committee rather than people like, right, we need to organise together. And we need to get things done.
Yeah, what Scruton assumes is, I've read that, but I can't remember that portion. But what Scruton is getting at is, one assumes, the sort of parochial, again, beg your pardon, the eccentricity of England. So I imagine he's less talking about the technocracy of modern bureaucracy, which is centralised, middle managementised. But he's talking about the sort of parish hall groups that meet. You've got this little village, and they need to organise the next fete, and they set up a committee, and there's a president for the task, and there's a secretary, and there's someone taking the minutes, and there's just something so wonderful, so wonderfully, people would call it chintzy, but I just think there's
it's contra-statist, isn't it?
Yeah,
it's not big government
localized,
doing it exactly.
I think that's probably what he's getting at, because it is people taking control of things, as opposed to what we now understand bureaucracy to mean, which is this centralized technocracy.
That kind of cuts down the heart of the heroic.
It robs the substance of the thing. It robs your vitality.
Exactly. So the point I was getting to before my little segue to the little group there was, when we were just talking, one of the questions I wanted to put before this group was, if you're considering what Christian nationalism looks like as a response to the cultural trash that we have to deal with today, as the impact of everything that's gone wrong in the modern world, which is just a huge question. There's loads of questions that you need to ask about it. And one of those questions is, when and why did things go wrong? So if we're saying, what do we want to get back to? If you look at certain politicians, even ones that I like, and we'll talk about English politics in a future episode soon, so listen out for that one. But you get different politicians who seem to think this is the date at which things went wrong. Like it might be, so Rupert Lowe even is who I think is, cards on the table, the best that we have right now. I think he would still kind of like Tony Blair's where it went wrong. 1997 is when it went wrong. And if we could just get back to 1990s Britain, and I'm like, I like the music, I liked, there's various things about 90s culture that are good, and
it goes further.
But it's way further. It's not even 70s. It's not even 60s. It's not 50s. Like you look at, as you mentioned, the Bloomsbury group. the 1920s was a horrendous time in Britain for like the fall of values. I was even referring to, like, recently I read a book by John Buchan. Have you ever read it, called The 39 Steps?
Oh, yes.
Highly recommended.
Yeah,
Basically a precursor to the precursor to James Bond.
Yeah.
So he wrote The 39 Steps. I think it came out in 1915.
Some great adaptations as well.
Yeah, exactly. It's been redone many times. That was 1915, and British soldiers read it in the trenches in the First World War. It's kind of espionage-esque, but it's basically the English imperial-minded man who's formed in a completely different... Like, reading it today, you're just like, there's so many little hints of what an English man used to require, or at least what he aspired to be. And you can definitely see the character of James Bond in him. Of course, completely different by the time... Bond becomes not only written but in movies, etc., from the latter half of the 20th century. It's a different beast, but you can see the essence of a capable man who wants to get stuff done and is able to kind of handle himself and able to adapt to different kinds of situations. And sort of this guy ends up falling into kind of accidentally becoming important to some government operation, but it was really because he was adventurous and was also capable and had to solve problems on the fly. And I think that's how people were brought up. With character, that's how you're brought up. The bureaucratic mindset would bring people up to be like, let me tell you how to solve this, and this task. And let me give you the apparatus and mechanics with which you can solve this, and this task. And then so you teach people just to learn how to do this, and this, prescribed. Whereas character formation, we've talked about this probably before, Bildung, etc., would be, which we had in the grammar schools in this country, which was forming men to be able to, in a Christian manner, so it was not separated from Christian faith. Somehow it meant something to be Christian, and to be Christian, to take dominion in the world, meant to be able to handle yourself on the world stage, and that's what England tried to cultivate, even in the empire. Again, I'm kind of gesturing to many future episodes we could do here on imperialism or whatever. But so anyway, John Buchan's 39 Steps is a great example of this, and men in the trenches are reading it. Then there's another one called Rogue Male, which is the Second World War, a different author, a similar kind of character, and that's what ultimately inspires what's his name?
Ian Fleming.
Ian Fleming's, who was of course active during the Second World War for the government. Inspires
he was
James
OSS,
Bond.
wasn't he? Was he OSS?
Yeah, I think so.
Secret Service.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, so there's a lot of his reflections on that.
Maybe I've just made that up.
But Rogue Male is the kind of 39 steps for the Second World War. And again, the soldiers are reading it, and it inspires them with that kind of capability on the fly. Now, the reason I'm going to that long tangent about these spy novels, antecedents, would be...
You are being announced as the next James Bond.
Listeners,
we have an announcement to make.
We're going to need you to upgrade your Patreon subscriptions. I need loads of money now. I need an Aston Martin that could fire rockets. I'm sorry. It's just essential to Christian.
Don't apologise.
If you want Christian nationalism, we need the Aston Martin. And Nathan doesn't need one because he never travels.
I'll be Miss Moneypenny. Put me in a dress.
just there taking the secretarial orders, etc. Yeah.
I don't know why I didn't choose Q. Where is Freud when you need him? Come on.
It. Yeah, Freud was absolutely doing a number on you now. Yeah. Exactly. No, yeah, Q, of course. But Q's gay now. That's the last few Bond films. They made Q gay. Of course they did. They make everything gay. So so basically, the 20th century, where did it go wrong? Now, of course, James Bond is even an example of where things have gone wrong. Because you get what was the muscular Christian man, even by Buchan's time, is probably not really Christian. But he's kind of formed in Christian character. The faith is already dwindling by 1915. James Bond becomes the kind of archetypal English men want to be like him and are nothing like him really, but we like to try and be like him, gentlemanly, courteous, but also dashing, masculine, forthright, able to make decisions in difficult situations and win and fight evil. Now, that's already bad because Bond is himself massively morally compromised, obviously, as a character. When you look at the John Buchan 39 Steps film that Alfred Hitchcock did in the 1930s, I think it's 1935 or something, maybe 36, I was watching with my wife and going this is crazy. Many people would think, can we get back to 1930s morality? It would be great. But if you watch it, you'd be like, this is sexually inappropriate. 1935, a film. You would think with all the standards they have, with all the prudishness that should still be there, it kind of is still there. You'd think was even there in the 50s, in the 30s and the 20s even. You've got moral standards obviously degrading, things that are literally inappropriate on the screen 100 years ago.
This is true even in the 1600s and 1700s, you know, with the various different plays that were being produced. This is what incited in large part the First Great Awakening, these sorts of, like the Beggar's Opera, and various different other things at the time, which were rowdy and lewd. And I mean, you can see this really, really easily, viewers, if you want to go and watch Bagpuss, which is a really lovely children's show. I'm not at all suggesting it's degenerate. However, what you
By the way, I like that you were very optimistic in saying viewers there. So
good point.
Hopefully the video does work.
Sorry, it's a good point. I am post-mill about the video.
About the video.
But yeah, even in Bagpuss, like if you watch the episodes, like when it tells the story of the mermaids, and the mermaids just have got like their breasts exposed, and there was a different approach to nudity even until very, very recently, and it's something that's really easy for us to forget. Actually, you can see it even in programs made in the 70s and 80s. So I'm not necessarily saying Bagpuss is degenerate, but I am saying that it is part of a wider culture that approached nudity in a certain way. I mean, any boy living in the UK who is, let's say, our age or older will know what it was like to like stumble upon page 3 in the park or something. Page 3 is the sun, but it doesn't do it anymore.
You would say to American listeners, go and look up page 3.
Do not look at this up.
But it's a British staple, isn't it?
So imagine like a national newspaper. It's kind of bonkers to think of.
It is crazy.
Yeah, a national newspaper called The Sun.
Like the most popular.
Huge circulation. Huge. Very popular, especially with working class people, but just generally very popular. And on page 3, so literally the first page you open, right there in front of you, bang, softcore pornography. Yeah. And it was... page 3 goes. Now, anyway, my point is that this is always the way, and I do think this is where, you know, scripturally, you know, when in Ecclesiastes it says, do not say, it is unwise for you to say that the former things were better than now. It is not from wisdom that you speak these things. And there is a lesson for us here as sort of conservative people, because the scripture, the biblical wisdom is that we were not made, we cannot get back what it was. We cannot. Because we're moving forwards. If the Lord wanted to get us back, he put us in a time machine. And more than that, he would have made us 1600, 1700 somethings rather than 2026 something. The point is not that we can't do something. I'm not meaning to sort of pour cold water on this fire to change things. But it is to say the task is not one of... how should I put it? Pure recovery alone.
Reconstruction.
It is reconstruction.
Or I'm actually saying it will look
something different.
But isn't reconstruction of the old, though, is it?
So you have to take something, and you have to take that which is old, but then you are making something new with it by the very act of doing it.
Exactly.
So this is my reading. Aaron, you're probably more an expert than I am on this, but this is my entire reading of T.S. Eliot's Wasteland and The Rock. The need to take that which is obviously destroyed, take that which is obviously but still something new can be built. A new home can be established. And T.S. Eliot is wonderful for this instinct, you know, to spell out things as they really are, and then to give you the thought of, but we can rebuild. Especially in The Rock, actually. Choruses from The Rock. Like, we can rebuild. Now, so what am I saying then? Is it wrong for us to look back and go, well, this is where it all went wrong? No, because that's how you rebuild. You need to know what went wrong and why. So... you're right. It doesn't just start. We need to do another episode on this. In the summer, I texted you, didn't I? Saying, no, not summer, Christmas. I'm losing track of time.
On our last episode, back in the summer.
Back in the summer,
When I last saw you.
So I texted you saying, I had a little minor epiphany about Christian nationalism and other things, and the way in which so many Christian nationalists, especially here in England, are not seeing something. Well, I'm going to save it there. I will not unpack it. But I do think that there are a spate of things in the 20th century. Like one little thing, go and look up the history of Whitsuntide. It's a really interesting point. Go and look up the history of Whitsuntide. When did that stop and why? Go and look it up, and you'll find out. Sorry, spoilers. And
you'll find out everything that I just told you that I was going to do an episode.
But you'll find out that it was a very deliberate choice, and it came at the same time when they redrew the boroughs of England, and also when they redrew public holidays to remove references to that. And there was a very deliberate choice. And now that was in 1970 or 1970 something. I'll have to obviously do some research before our next episode to have these dates more fresh in my mind. But the point is that it goes much further back. And there are layers of this. And arguably, we have to do several things if we want to restore an English Christian nation. We have to get our heads around monarchy. I'm going to keep banging this drum over and over and over again. We need to get our heads around monarchy. We need to stop being squidgy about it because you need to ask yourself, where does the authority to legislate come from?
Yeah.
And if you haven't answered that question, you aren't doing Christian nationalism at all.
Yeah.
And the answer is, the only real consistent model in my mind is monarchy. But
Absolute monarchy.
American, absolute monarchy. But also, even if that's not the case, that's fine. You're just operating in a different tradition. You're operating in an American tradition. It's fine. But I'm just saying, if we're talking about England,
by the way, that should be our response. If someone asks you, do you believe in monarchy? Absolutely.
Absolutely.
I absolutely believe in monarchy. But no, you're right, and I think it's interesting that that's where the question's coming from. Like, where did it go wrong?
Yeah.
And so you refer to the wasteland. Of course, the listeners can go and again, we're giving you lots to Google.
Do some homework.
You got to Google existentialism, Whitsuntide, and now go and read and T.S. Eliot's The Wasteland. Those of you who may or may not have studied that poem, but it's the expression of everything that. Of the kind of condition of the post-First World War mind for the European. It's like, what has gone wrong? We've just realised that our civilization has just gone to war with itself. That's literally what happened. Like all of the different arrangements and imperial kind of alliances, kind of Christendom imploding on itself was the First World War. Of course, people say the Second World War, and we talk about the post-war consensus. Actually, of course, I agree that is an absolutely meaningful term because of Nazism and the fear of sounding anything remotely like whatever the Nazis ever thought or did, including being against Marxism. But really, we need to think about the post-war consensus relating to the First World War, because it was far more cataclysmic to European confidence and therefore really Christendomian confidence. And so, so the Wasteland expresses that by all these fragments of different things that have gone wrong with modern morality, etc. And hearkening back to old myths and old things. Where do we come from? Where are we going to go in the future? And so when you first read it and you think, goodness, does he even believe in anything? But of course, Eliot was a Christian, wrote a book about Christianity and civilization and culture. And so these are things that we need to know precisely, because otherwise we'll make the kind of missteps that you're talking about, where we kind of go the wrong way and move in the wrong
and I think
direction forward.
It's little things. I mean, again, we'll do a proper episode on this, won't we? But it's little things like we need to think about. I know this sounds ridiculous. I'm just going to say it. But things like we need to think about the restoration of all titles and old institutions and what that actually looks like. So like David Starkey at the moment is talking about his Great Repeal Bill. So if Reform get in, he's advising on the Great Repeal Bill, and he is largely focused on Blairism. Yeah,
I mean, of course, Blair was terrible.
Absolutely. So there's no doubt it would do much good. But at the same time, Starkey is himself. I don't mean any disrespect to the man, but Starkey is himself. In himself, being quite a flagrant homosexual and quite hostile to Christianity, he is not an ally to the English Christian cause. He's good at diagnosing the issues, but in this, he is also not going further enough back. Yeah. So he would be, let me not speak anymore about David Starkey, but little things like the role and the office of like Lord Chancellor, for example, and the role of the office of peerage, and these things have been slowly but surely removed and whittled down. Yeah. And we need to think more deeply about this. Now, as for English Christian nationalism, again, we need that wisdom from Ecclesiastes to understand this isn't about just going backwards. And it is not from wisdom that you say the former times were better than now. And the strange thing there, by the way, is that I've been thinking a lot about this, is that surely, in the context of biblical wisdom, sometimes it is right to say that. Because, of course, like someone living in... I don't know, an Israelite on the banks of the, in Babylon, where they wept, would be very justly able to say, former times were better than these. That's what they're doing. Yeah. That's
what the lament is over.
Exactly.
The destruction of. Yeah.
So it's not so much like the autistic, it's technically wrong. No, it's about gaining a wise heart. It's the character formation. Yeah. And I think an unwise and quite... feeble heart sort of says, well, if only it was 1920 again, or if only it was 1910 again. Well, it isn't. We're not there. Yeah. So what do we do to make it 2026 and different? That's the difference. So like whatever happens, it's like at the end of Lord of the Rings or something. I'm thinking of any other franchise you might think of, but let's choose Tolkien again.
Well, no, because that is the best one.
Yeah, of course. Let's just do it. Yeah. So like the point is that, Frodo and others are saying we can't forget what we've just been through. And Sam, when he stays behind to rebuild the Shire, he's not going to forget that what's just happened, the scouring of the Shire, assuming we're going with the book version. Yeah. He's not going to forget that. He's not going to forget everything, and he's going to rebuild it differently and better. Yeah. So
that's what I mean by the differences of American Christian nationalism has to be different to English and or British. Because
so
we've been through something different.
I think that really does actually, expose this quite fully. Because when we're talking about English Christian nationalism, if that's the term we're going to use, fine. But it will mean thinking about the three, like the Houses of Parliament. It will mean thinking about our justice system and historically how those used to work. Like, for example, just the role of even the existence of the Supreme Court as well, and these things. Whereas for Americans, the Supreme Court, their Supreme Court, is baked into their constitution and their diffusal of powers. Like they can't get rid of that. It would be un-American to think in those terms. Whereas for us, it is un-British to think of a Supreme Court. And until we address these things, and by the way, this isn't adjacent to Christian concerns. This is a Christian concern, because if Christian nationalists are going to start thinking, right, how do we bring about true justice in England in the likeness of Christ? Well, we need to think about what the structures of justice might look like, and what the structures of authority might look like. And what obedience to monarchy might look like. That's what it actually looks like. Yeah. It's not a diversion. It is of the essence.
And we are getting to the point now, I think, people who are thinking about this, it's not the notion of Christian nationalism and or nationism, as one of our listeners, Rob, has coined, but I think I've heard other people use that term as well now. Like if you don't like the illism because you think it sounds like a modern sort of imposition of a concept. Or it suggests that your nation comes before your faith or whatever. Fine, but I think nationalism is fine. We'll have another episode some other time. This is the episode of pointing to other episodes. Yeah, we're giving you a trail of 7 other episodes that are going to happen. That's the idea. But basically, like if we're going to recover it, it's not just this abstract idea anymore. It's not just like liberals have called you a Christian nationalist. So I guess actually maybe we are. Maybe we actually do want that. That's true. It's getting to the point where, you've got secular media, Sky News. I interviewed Kai Dua recently, Sky News did a whole piece on him as the kind of far right bishop who's an exponent of Christian nationalism. There's the Humanist Society regularly talking about how fearful they are of Christian nationalism. Of course, The Guardian have done articles on Christian nationalism in Britain specifically. So not just there's this thing in America, this niche thing. And of course, Doug Wilson is now... It's getting lots of airtime on CNN and other places in the last year because they're starting to almost take it seriously as a thing. It used to be the tactic was talk about it like some crazy neo-Nazi like enclave, and then no one will have to pay attention to it. Now it's like a thing that people are paying attention to, and more Christians are waking up to it and going, oh yeah, maybe I have to have a view on this. So British people are going to take longer, but especially evangelical leaders, are going to take a long time to get used to it, but they'll eventually have to articulate something resembling what we mean when we talk about Christian nationalism. They'll have to think it through. Yeah. The gears are slowly changing in their heads, and they're going, oh, actually, yes, this is a consistent form of mission to care about justice and mercy in the land according to Christian principles. So what does that look like? And it's like, now we're getting to the point of how would it actually happen? What are the mechanisms that need to be in place? What are the societies that need to be in place that could actually help bring this about?
And this is what I mean. I think we'll do another episode on this. Again, we're pointing forward. This
episode
is a prologue.
number 8.
Yeah. But I do think, if those conversations are to happen, and I'm putting this out there to those who are listening, who are more au fait with these conversations or in the conversations, but you need to be doing more than just thinking about Blair. And you need to be actively thinking about monarchy, Houses of Parliament, justice system, old offices and titles,
and the civil service,
civics, but also civil holidays as well. You need to be thinking about all these things. But I would say it has been a wild ride. As I just said a moment ago, it's odd because COVID was now 6 years ago, which is crazy to think of. This Christian nationalism thing has only really been for the last 2 or 3 years. And in 2 or 3 years, so much has happened. I mean, we were thinking about these things years. Sorry, this sounds a bit hipsterish, but we were thinking and talking about these things years before. I remember reading, I was reading relevant material years ago, but it's only in the last 2 or 3 years it's got this stink attached to it. Yeah. And I think it's partly because, don't get me wrong, will there be some unsavory personalities or celebrities attaching themselves to this? Yeah, I'm sure there will be. But it is more than that. As you're saying, it's because of I think we've discussed this on previous podcasts, the sort of English snobbery with regard to America.
Yeah.
So one thing that What John Church gets criticised a lot for in some circles is being like American Christianity imported over. And that is true of this more generally. This sort of American snob, if it's American Christianity, well, it must just be extreme, reactionary, blah, blah, blah. The reality, as we're saying, is that this does have an English distinctive. But even if we are talking about this because Doug Wilson is talking about it, or Joe Webben is discussing it, or because the Americans on Twitter are discussing it, well, so what? This still has an import for us. These ideas still have an import. What concerns me, though, is that I do think if we're going to have these conversations about Christian nationhood and whether or not we use the term nationalism, we have to do business now with the fact that, unfortunately, Sky News have noticed and The Guardian have noticed.
Which is, it's not unfortunate, it's good.
And the detractors, It's unfortunate in the sense that I feel increasingly, this is a personal opinion, like the term is very quickly falling out of our ability to control. Now, that's not going to be agreed on by everyone, but I very quickly feel like, and it's not me, by the way, saying we should neglect it, but I am increasingly feeling like the progressive press have done a very good job at trying to muddy it.
I mean, I actually think that that's been the case from the beginning. So I actually think the funny thing is, it started obviously as a slur. It was like, what are you, some kind of Christian nationalist?
I don't think it did.
I think in the States it definitely did.
I don't think it did. I remember the early conversations about this on social media and elsewhere. And remember, we were talking about Chesterton, we were talking about Lewis, we were talking about these others, and we were just using nationalism as a catch-all.
But the phrase nationalism, we would talk about that. But I'm saying that when it came into the public domain, like let's say 5 years ago, before Stephen Wolf's written his book, people are talking about maybe a bit more than 5 years ago, but people are talking about the need to maintain this kind of liberal order. It's the court of high woke, of course, which is waning now, but it's like, in order to counteract that, what do you want? And people who started to challenge it would be like, oh, you want to impose your Christian values on? Are you some kind of Christian nationalist? So what I'm saying is they would use that term as the stick to poke anybody who cared about public Christianity. And so then those people started to go, well, I don't know if I am a Christian nationalist. And then they start thinking through the logic and go, actually, yes. And you remember that phrase, Christian nation gooder than trans and kids? That was often people had that in their bio line around that kind of time, because it's like, well, whatever, call me whatever you want. I'll take that over whatever the kind of drag queen story hour nonsense. So what we're seeing is the kind of the devil overplaying his hand with with the absolute volcanic eruption of the 20th century and all of the philosophical existentialist trash that emerged from it. So that river of trash is going down and is sort of overdone, as it was. It's burst its banks, maybe, and we're now having to work. People who thought they could contain it, they couldn't. It's come into areas they didn't expect it to come into, and then they're like, well, how do we solve this? Well, we need to go back to something. What did we used to have? Well, we used to have Christian nations, actually, and so therefore, in a time when you're not allowed to have nationalism because of the Nazis, we're going to be Christian nationalists.
I think in the words of Queen Elizabeth II, recollections may vary. I think one thing I was definitely... You remember we've talked about Gamergate and stuff before?
Yeah.
I remember in the the mid-2000s, you got like Sargon of Akkad being very active on this, like The Amazing Atheist, Thunderfoot. Those of you on YouTube will know some Sean Head, some of these people. And one of the active debates around that time was the corresponding virtues of either ethnic nationalism or civic nationalism. Yeah. So nationalism didn't start a conversation. Yeah, you're right. It was always received opposition from some, of course, any form of nationalism. But I remember very vigorously civic nationalism was being defended by Sargon at that time and others. Right. Because it was seen as a sort of way to retain what at that point he would have been sympathetic with, which was classical liberalism, but whilst preserving an instinct.
This is Carl Benjamin.
Whilst preserving a sense of the nation. And that's lots of people. I remember at the time calling myself a civic nationalist because I was like, well, and I still would not want to be racist. But what I mean is, it's like, oh, I'm not racist. I just want to preface that, because if I just said that, you'd be like, so you are saying you are now racist? That's the change. But no, so yeah, I remember saying, civic nationalist in the sense that I'm patriotic, and I also don't think nationalism is a dirty word necessarily. It's just a form of, it's just a description of your priorities. But that slowly, and then especially around when Doug Wilson was becoming more into the ascendancy. I know he's always been popular to some extent, but especially, he really did have a turn around COVID, didn't he? Where things started to become
I don't think Doug Wilson's ever been popular, by the way. Like,
sure.
I think his strength was that he was saying stuff when
more
it wasn't
popular. More popular.
Yeah, because he was ousted from evangelicalism, really.
But I definitely remember
mainstream.
At that time this term Christian nationalism coming up.
Yes, absolutely.
And thinking that's interesting as a term. And then, I mean, we could trace it, couldn't we? We haven't done we're kind of talking from ignorance, both of us, in the sense that we should probably have like a record of things in front of us. But my recollection is that you then start to get like Christianity Today writing about it. Yeah. There's a reaction. So originally it starts as this more positive grassroots philosophy. And then Russell Moore, Christianity Today. And then we've seen the exact same thing happen with so-called English Christian nationalism, in which it starts as this sort of, can we be relatively big-headed in saying we were one of the first people talking in public about this, about English Christian nationalism?
We were the first podcast.
We were the first podcast. Well, we were some of the first people publicly talking about this, probably. About specifically English Christian nationalism. And then in the aftermath, not of us necessarily, but generally, you start to see The Guardian, you start to see Sky News, you start to see Puff pieces and BBC pieces about Christian nationalism and other things. And
Trump's part of this.
And Trump is, he's like the TDS, Trump derangement syndrome is a big problem. Huge. You associate it, again, and the English snobbery against American people, that also comes into it. You're just being an American.
A quick footnote on that. I don't know if I shared this before, but last year I spoke in Birmingham at a March for Life event about men and pro-life movement. Mm-hmm. It was outside maybe one of the only nice buildings left in Birmingham, which is really nice. I think it's Victoria Square. Which
don't speak too loudly; they will knock it down.
Yeah, they might actually.
They'll go and knock it down.
Yeah, that's it. The heritage of Enoch Powell is long gone from the Birmingham ways. So, anyway, so I was there, and Sky News were there, like filming and interviewing people. And so they interviewed me afterwards because I'd done the speech, and it was fascinating how little they knew about Christians and pro-life. Like they were like, oh, what's this like new thing? Is this because like you want to be like Americans? Like because J.D. Vance has like said, spoken about pro-life mattering. Wow. Is this like really a MAGA thing? So they interviewed me for about 25 minutes. I don't even know if they used the footage because I don't know if I gave them. They were literally trying to get this one answer for the whole time. But you are kind of saying that you want to be a bit like, pally up to sort of Trump. But they'd used various alterations of that exact kind of question. They wanted to get a quote, pro-life Christian leader, deliberately trying to make a connection, or because J.D. Vance said this, we are going to do this here. Now we can say all the stuff we're worried about with MAGA is going to infiltrate Britain or is infiltrating Britain, even among religious communities, pro-life, etc. Now they care about abortion. It's like, what?
And of course, what they don't know is that we have Chesterton, we have Lewis, we have Tolkien, we have a whole history of Christian monarchs and Christian coronations, because people don't understand their own history. But you're right. I mean, it's the assumption that you're just being American, you're just being stupid like Trump. But you'd be an idiot to even think anything positive about him. Don't get me wrong, I have criticisms of Trump, but in this instance, it's got nothing to do with him. No. And it's got nothing really to do with American Christian nationalism either. I mean, I don't spend my time thinking about Wolf and others.
I think it's fair to give credit to the American conversation because it does help us to think through these things. And actually, Americans are bolder than us. We've been like we were the bold nation. Like Britain was, I would argue, the boldest nation in the world in its time, and America has taken that mantle off us. Maybe because they got all of our pioneers.
They're certainly very bold, and you're right. They are talking.
Like so they push.
We
the
shouldn't be
conversation
churlish
further.
and say they weren't doing anything. But what I mean is that they're not informing.
Yeah,
they're not informing my vision of English nationhood,
of
English Christian nationhood. And that's not me being churlish. I love what the Americans are doing, but it really is distinct. and we have to keep pressing that.
In applying it, for sure.
In applying
it's going to look very different.
It's why I personally wouldn't. I know some listeners would. Personally, wouldn't use terms like make England great again, and that sort of stuff. Appropriating the MAGA thing. I just personally not a big fan. It's not necessary. We've got other resources. You can get a sort of meme quality out of it, I suppose, but it's not necessarily. You don't need to refer to
we
that
have great
frame.
in our title, so we have a greater claim to saying making. We do. Makes it make Britain great again.
Yeah,
but no, you're right. I think, but I think it's just there is. I do think there's more of a confluence in the conversations than you would allow, unless we're talking about different things here. Because I think you're saying we don't. We already have the resources here. We don't need this conversation. But I'm saying that the American conversation has opened the door. And Trump has even opened the door and to lots of bad stuff as well, but lots of good stuff in terms of just blowing away lots of the stuff that we would probably spend a long time with our committees trying to find solutions to problems that ultimately will have become obsolete in their specificity by the time we actually get to doing something about them. Mm-hmm. So I think that a huge, in terms of American British culture, a besetting sin of ours would be miring ourselves in nuance, reflection, and inactivity, because we're kind of able to hold many different things in tension. Americans, the besetting sin might be, well, it certainly is, a problem of a lack of nuance and lack of an inability to hold tension, because they're so active and so good at getting stuff done and blowing the door down. And we need to do this. We need to be pragmatic. American pragmatism. So we can actually. I think there's an interesting way in which we can both
and
help
let's be
one
clear,
another's
I think the
causes
American
here,
conversation is vital.
Yeah.
Do we need them? Of course we do, to the extent that they're our brothers and sisters and they have gone through things that we haven't got. And as you're saying, some of that personality is absolutely necessary. What I'm saying is the resources for the theoretical frame of English Christian nationhood.
They're going to come from here anyway.
Exactly. Yeah. That's what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
We do not need Donald Trump to tell us how to run a Christian nation. As in, we don't need the frame. We don't need that. We just don't. It's not just saying that he's not good or he's not this. Or, don't take offense. It's just saying that we have the resources. I'm being optimistic here about England, not pessimistic.
Yeah.
There's another classic English trait, just talking ourselves down.
Yeah, that's true.
We have got enough here to do. Now, that I absolutely think that. I mean, Doug Wilson was one of those, of course, in those early years of COVID, who is massively inspirational. And ultimately, America is the water we swim in anyway. Mm-hmm. So we can't get around it. It's not like, one of the reasons why I'm thinking about political things is because America is, America sets the tone of political discourse. Yeah. So absolutely, you're right. We need America, and to that extent, and also they can teach us a lot about being front-footed.
They're also welcome to rejoin the empire
at any time they want. Yeah,
we'll happily take them back.
Yeah, I do think that when I teach the history kids that I have about America, a lot of them have a perception from media, because American pop culture is everywhere here, so we swim in this stuff, as I say. But I for most of the time, I just spend the time creating an apologia for America, because I love America.
Because of the anti-American sentiment in our culture.
I have to try and sort of inoculate them against this anti-American snobbery.
Yeah.
And even with stuff like guns, which loads of English people do not understand, or even just like, I suppose like Manifest Destiny and the expansionism and the front, all this sort of stuff. I'm trying to get them to see that baked into the American mind is a sense of great adventure, and also, I'm not going to do what you tell me. I'm going to do what is right. And that is, I think that ultimately you could trace that to something here.
Yes, definitely.
But even so, that there's something unique about the American mind that is, it's not just about the material wealth and riches.
It's the principle.
It's the principle. There's an adventurousness.
Yeah.
We are a nation of shopkeepers. We are hobbits here. We do like to stay within our places. Not all of us. Me more than you, Aaron, certainly. But I don't have a passport.
Well, like I said,
for example.
It's funny, isn't it? Napoleon. When is Napoleon saying that? Is that? I don't understand it, because I think the 19th century Britain is like the most adventurous and less shopkeeper. Like David Livingstone, etc. You've got all of these. You've got, like I've said many times, you've got Japan looking at like, what is it that makes the English schoolboy?
It's the eccentricity, I suppose, and I suppose the island,
the literal
insularity about England. But yeah.
But we have lost. The thing is, we've lost
that.
The 20th century
absolutely lost that.
Finished off what we had left of it.
And we were opposed to. I'm not saying we should. We've said this in a previous episode, I think. So forgive me, listener, if I'm repeating myself. But like when driving, when seatbelts were introduced, like loads of English people went, I'm not doing that. I'm not wearing that.
Yeah.
And when various other I was even just today teaching about public health legislation. It really struggled because loads of English people just went, I'm not listening to the government tell me what I can and can't eat or what I can and can't sell. And likewise for conscription.
Yeah.
Like that was totally foreign to the English mind until 1918. You can't tell me who to fight for and what to do. You can't. That mentality, the Americans still have it.
Yeah.
That plus the adventure. So it's those two things.
Yeah.
It is the refusal to be told what to do by government and also the adventure that says anything we can do this. The optimism.
Whereas we've become conformable, and I think that's the problem. That's where British people who are, you just see it everywhere. And by the way, you see it especially in Christianity, like in Christian leaders, what is left of the church, the kind of remnant of the church in Britain today. It's so depressing because the people who tend to be recognised as good leaders don't tend to be the adventurers, don't tend to be the more masculine type of guy. It tends to be the kind who is sensible, able to hold things together, which I know is important. Like those that's not an unimportant element of leadership. You don't just want a load of gung-ho cowboys, etc., running into the hills, expanding and expanding and expanding and advancing without any sense of holding together what you have. America will have and is having an existential crisis precisely because it's run out of its meaning. All it can go back to is its founding. But really, is that enough of a founding for the meaning of your entire civilization? No, it isn't. That's why you have to kind of that's why lots of Americans are Anglophiles, because they're looking back beyond. Like, why did we need to exist again? Like, you are going to have an existential crisis as a culture if you just do and do and do and do and do and don't think why. Like, why do we exist? Why should we preserve it? That's why it ends up, why should we protect our borders? That's why we had the kind of ridiculously the American political Democrat liberalism, which has just ravaged the nation, and it's kind of precipitated the need for someone like Trump to come and open the door.
But I think if America is to recover anything, it is to recover that sense of the adventure, as I say, and the sort of. I think they also need to reclaim some of that, standing up to authority thing. But I think they've got enough of that, some of them in spades. But just generally, there's a need for. I think that there is a sort of statist influence spreading in America.
Yeah, absolutely.
Which they should definitely watch out for.
Yeah.
Here, we need to preserve our eccentricity. I think we need to preserve the fact that our streets don't make sense. And that our houses don't make sense, and the Constitution is unwritten, and we have a monarch, and we have a lot of what we need to resist is common sense. That's the to reference Thomas Paine. Yeah. We need to resist common sense of as you're saying, the bureaucratization. It makes sense to add. 1 million people every single year to increase our GDP. It makes sense to become more like the French and the continent and get rid of our jury trials. It makes sense to do these things.
The homeschool one. It makes sense to ban homeschooling in England because they've banned it in Germany.
Exactly.
Without referencing the fact that it was the Nazis who banned it. And that's
exactly.
And I thought you didn't like sounding like the Nazis.
Yeah.
Except when that.
Well, we'll talk about this when we get to English Constitution. I think it'll be a good conversation to have about English eccentricity and why it matters for English Christian nationhood. But for now, I think what we're saying is that we need that sense of rebuilding.
Yes.
We need that sense of rebuilding. We need to look back to what has been. We need to understand ourselves and our national fabric, whilst at the same time acknowledging that we are doing something new at the same time.
Yes.
And that I think we need to be. I think as English people, we need optimism again. Yeah. We need the sense of the fresh. Something new is happening.
Specifically, men, by the way, and it's not at all to without either going into a boring, an androgyny, egalitarian caveat, whatever. It's not to denigrate the women who have different ways of expressing what they need to express under God. But specifically, we need women to be optimistic, but we need men especially to be optimistic. And by which I mean not just not thinking more highly of their chances than is actually wisely the case, but it's to say we believe in faith. We're showing faith. We believe in God and we believe in the future, believe in hope. And we're going to act in that way, live in that way and project that in the kind of way that built the kind of buildings that we saw in Vienna, that I saw in Vienna, that you heard about in the songs about Vienna, or that you can see in this country historically. Like this is what, again, Roger Scruton was so good on. Like architecture reflects the philosophy of a culture. Like what you believe about yourself is reflected in the buildings that you build and what's going to be there for posterity. And it tells you something about the hope. It tells you about how people are going to live. And men are essential to that. And even if they're like, what do you mean? How does that even work? I'm not going to be building things, like building actual buildings. Or maybe not. But the way you live your life, the way you build your life, the kind of relationships you have, how you think about the future, the kind of plan you have for your life or for your family, for your church, your community, that has to reflect something of that adventurous, hopeful, faith-filled spirit.
I think there's several ways to fight as men. Obviously, one of them is physical, another one is political. But I think what we fail to recognise sometimes is that optimism is a form of resistance. And by that I mean, it's obviously related to hope. And despair is a sin. We should always be hopeful, for love hopes all things and therefore endures all things. Yeah. But we should be optimistic in this, because it is. I've noticed amongst men in particular, and certain kinds of men, really, not all men. Sometimes some men are given to exactly what I'm about to criticize. But when someone tells you, oh, you can't do that, when I don't know, like a company, if you sat in a board meeting, or I don't know, something like it, and you get told, we're trying to do this, we're trying to do this, we're trying to build this classroom, we're trying to put this here, we're trying to move into that area, we're trying to merge these accounts, we're trying to make an alliance with that company, and they say, you can't do this because of this and this. It's like a form of bureaucratic oppression. So you can't do this because of this, this, and this, and this. And the instinct of every man I actually like is, let's just do it. We can do it. We'll find a way. And it's that irritates some men, and my experience, many women as well, but not all, but many women. But it also it energizes other men, and I think that is the sort of optimism with the church when someone is telling you can't do this. Really, I mean, there's this. You've got to realize that you'd be facing this obstacle and this obstacle and this, and you go. Nah. It's
the cheerful defiance, isn't it? That's the Chestertonian spirit that we need, that we had and need. I mean, funnily enough, to show how true that is in terms of how people think today, there's a comedian who I've forgotten his name, and he just does little shorts on Facebook. It's kind of a northern guy in England, and he did this hilarious sketch which was like how it would actually happen for James Bond in today's world, and it'd be like, the name's Bond, James Bond. Sorry, your name's not on the computer here, and. Sorry, actually, I'm just going to do a little check. Yeah, you're wanted for like loads of crimes, and like so you can't. So like how like Bond projects this kind of like everything that he does, all the plans tend to just smooth. Like he gets into anywhere. There's no real. He seems to have this like seamless ability to overcome the bureaucratic structures, which is not unrelated. Even if the people who currently are wokeifying James Bond, the franchise, don't know why they're doing it, it was still there in the character of that. The character only works because he's still like that. And so that still harkens back to Buchan and before him, in the sense of this is what an English man is supposed to do. He's supposed to overcome defiantly the things that seem to be obstructing everyone else, but no one believes that anymore. So that's why it's kind of laughable. Like even when he said, another part of this comedian sketch was talking about, the martini shaken, not stirred, and the guy said, don't tell me how to do my job, mate. Like he's kind of like a barman, like referring to like those are the kind of things that in reality you can watch a film, you can hear a sermon, or you can read a book and go, yes, I'm going to go, and then you can be completely deflated by the actual real life of what modern Britain is like, and how everybody is bureaucratically controlled. Nobody has the kind of willingness of character, hardly anyone has, to be able to sort of understand what needs to be done, rather than constantly referring to those small technicalities that they've been trained in, because they haven't been trained in building, they haven't been trained as formation of character, they've been trained to do whatever job they've been paid to do. And therefore they don't know what it means, they don't know how it connects to anything else in society, because everyone else runs society for them, even though they are society. Like someone else is in charge of the things that actually make the world run, so which makes a tiny cabal of careerist politicians, basically in Westminster, and civil servants who kind of actually run the government, to really change the direction of all of our society. And we wonder why our culture is disintegrated, because most of the people don't feel empowered to actually live in the way they ought, and actually take responsibility for their own society.
Absolutely.
So anyway, you're looking at me in the kind of way of like, well, this is a...
No, I was only going to say, I do, again, I'll re-emphasize, I think some of the most interesting, it is a man thing. Like some of the most interesting, usually the most interesting men I know are the sort who will be told, this and this and this and this. And they're going, surely that's not how it actually is. And then though, at a certain point you've got to admit defeat, of course.
Yeah.
But this is what I mean. It's a form of resistance,
exactly.
a mental resistance to the way in which things are, to be optimistic. And you don't have to translate that to your eschatology, but you can.
But it helps.
But it helps. Yeah.
That's right.
You can say, no, it doesn't always have to be like this. Sorry. And surely that's not how it works. Let me go and have a look myself.
Yes.
And that's... It's quite an American thing, I suppose, at least in their origins. But it's also something that is proper to many men, and it's something we will need as the church as we seek to resist.
Yes.
The way many will be telling us you can't really do this. Surely it's not really how it works, and we just have to say, nah, that's not how it works.
Yeah. And can we not even say? No, we must say that it is a Christian thing. Like, who is the most based masculine man ever? It's Jesus Christ, and the way that he dealt with the things that kind of stood in his way, as it were.
You can't
the
do
obstacles,
that.
you can't do that. Well,
that.
no. And so I'm not going to, and it's not as easy, again, we're not going to go into a whole Christology thing, but it's not as easy as going, but that was the Son of God, so it's different.
It was true man.
It's true man, not just pretending to look like a man and face the struggles that men face for a scene. That's heretical to assume that Jesus is, I can just magic into my a different mode. So we're not modalist, and we're trying to say, no, Jesus is a great exemplar, and he's puts into motion the greatest movement that's ever happened on earth of people, which is the church, the people of God. And we see that whole buccaneering spirit. We see that in the apostles. We see that in the apostolic fathers. We see that in the many missionaries in the Middle Ages. We see that in the reformers. We see that in the modern missionaries.
Yeah.
And that's what we're talking about. We're saying Satan says no, or the computer says no. Well, sorry, not sorry.
We'll find out about that.
Yeah, we'll see. Yeah. And I think that's what we need to recover as a Christian virtue. So it isn't even, yes, it's British. Yes, there's elements of British culture in it. Yes, there's elements of American culture. But that's because those two cultures, more substantively than others, have been massively influenced by Christian. Yeah. So, yeah. Well, anyway, we hope you found this episode enlightening on some level, small e, and that you will continue to listen to the many episodes that we've now promised you that we are going to talk about at some point. And we'll be back with another episode soon. So until then, listener or viewer, be strong in the Lord and in the strength of his might. Defy the devil and act like men. Love the brotherhood. Fear God. Christ is Lord. God save the King. This has been That Good Fight. We'll see you next time.